I think there's always going to be outside noise, but I think we've been professionals long enough to know that if you let that affect you, then you're not really here for the right things. And so for us, we just keep the main thing, and that's hoops.
Hey, speaking of that outside noise, Sophie, your teammate, Sophie came out with
Oh, thank you. Have a good day. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So the Fever were up against the Portland Fire yesterday, and it was a pretty good game. Caitlin Clark scored another triple-double, and people came out once again in support of Sophie Cunningham.
We showed up today here in support of Sophie Cunningham and her stance on biological men in women's sports, and being the first professional athlete to stand up and say that she doesn't think it's fair, and do it in a very respectful, kind, and loving way. So we're here to support her.
Awesome. And why was that so important to you?
She's the first woman professional athlete to kind of speak out about this problem, and she did it in such a respectful, loving way. She was like, this is not about hate at all, this is about protecting female presence in women's sports, and I just really admired that as the first biological to come out.
Have you had any experience with that yourselves?
Yes, so we are both track and field athletes from the state of Oregon. Last year at the state high jump meet, I competed against a biological male in the women's high jump and was peacefully protested stepping off the podium alongside another girl.
Okay. What place did you come in last year?
I came in third last year.
Okay. And you got down off of the stadium when they were, or off of the what do they call that?
The podium.
The podium when they were awarding the medals.
Yes.
What happened to you after that? Did you have any blowback from that?
A little bit, yeah. Me and Reese Eckerd from Sherwood, we were the two that took a stance on that, and we did face a lot of backlash. We had people calling our schools, telling us not to let them walk at graduation, a lot of harassment.
A lot of people showed up, as they did when they were playing Seattle. And we know how Portland is. There were definitely trans activists. We saw them in the crowd. They had trans flags, and they appeared on a jumbotron. We had trans flags and pride flags. And in the end, although Portland brought the fire, the Fever reached 112. So people were noticing that Sophie Cunningham was getting booed excessively. And it was a great moment where she scored a three-pointer, turned around, and called the crowd losers. She also gifted a shoe to a fan, and the fan, just clearly made that fan's night. So a quick update about the game that happened in Seattle, the incident with the co-owner berating two 16-year-old girls. Well, that co-owner has actually faced some penalties.
You leave my daughter alone! Go! She's a minor!
Garbage! Take the trash out! Take the trash out!
Take the trash out. That was to children. The WNBA is now disciplining Seattle Storm co-owner Celeste Keaton after she allegedly berated two teenage fans of Sophie Cunningham. The teens were wearing shirts from a brand that stands up for no biological men in young women's sports, XX and XY chromosomes on the shirt. Now, they were holding signs thanking her, Sophie Cunningham, for speaking up over biological men competing in women's sports, just two of them. The teens say that Keaton approached them, by the way, using a lot of profanity that we can't directly quote on air. So pepper that in your thoughts right now, as she also called them insane and telling these two young girls that Jesus would forgive them and, quote, God can save you. One teen reported that the encounter left her in tears because she had never been screamed like that by an adult. Keaton has now been suspended from her team's next 5 home games, and the Seattle Storm released an apology saying this: "We are aware one of our co-owners made comments to 2 fans in attendance at last night's game. We apologize that this happened. Everyone who attends a Storm game deserves to feel welcome, and we remain committed to creating an inclusive environment where every fan is treated with respect." Sophie Cunningham is weighing in as well, calling the owner's behavior, quote, truly embarrassing, while saying that everyone deserves a seat at the table, even when they disagree. She praised the young girls for standing by their beliefs and even says she'll be sending the pair gifts.
So Portland Fire was saying, or the Moda Stadium, I'm not sure which one, they were saying that they're taking precautions because they heard about the people who showed up to Seattle Storm. They heard about, the women and girls and men who showed up in support of women's sports. Apparently, that's why they needed to take extra precautions. When in reality, it was the Sophie Cunningham fans who had every reason to be wary after what happened in Seattle. But anyway, there were no reported incidents so far at Portland. Everything seemed to have gone well, apart from, the excessive booing and people waving trans flags all over the place. So the Fever coach, Stephanie White, was asked about her stance on men competing in women's sports. I guess with everything happening with Sophie Cunningham, the issue has resurfaced. And she was asked about it. And what do you think her response was? Well, let's take a look.
What's your stance? What is your stance on men or athletes who test as biological male participating in women's sports? What's your personal stance?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say that I'm educated enough from a scientific standpoint. I don't ever believe that exclusion is an answer. I just don't. I do think, when we think about various levels of sport, various governing bodies of sport and things that go into that, like I said, I'm not educated enough at the different levels. I know growing up, I played with the boys all the time.
So
there weren't girl sports.
Would you welcome a biological male in WNBA?
Again, it's like, I don't know, when we talk about biological male and scientifically where we are, I think it's a totally different scenario. As I said, I'm not educated enough in terms of transgender and transitioning to give you a smart answer. I would say, though, that I just don't feel like exclusion is an answer, and I think that we need to have deeper, more layered conversations.
And you'd be okay with them in the locker room?
Yeah. Is there any frustration, because you guys are in a really fantastic run, that this is distracting from that?
There is a frustration, of course, because we want to talk about basketball, and we want to continue to work on our game, and we want to continue to grow as a team. But I also understand, like, this is part of our growth edge as a league, right? It's part of our growth edge as a league, and we have to be able to manage. We have to be able to insulate as much as we can, and then we have to be able to lead with conversation.
Thank you so much.
Oh, that insufferable journalist at the end. Is there frustration? Like, what are you talking about? Just trying to virtue signal. Anyway, so she straddled the fence. She straddled the fence and pled ignorance. I don't know much about it. To say that exclusion is not the answer is just a complete cop-out. It's very dishonest, actually, because the very definition of a women's category is to exclude men. There is no WNBA if men are not excluded. Oh yeah, you played with boys when you were growing up. Good for you. Were you dunking? So yes, exclusion absolutely is the answer. That's why we have women's basketball to begin with. There would be no WNBA if there wasn't exclusion. But unfortunately, what women have been dealing with for a very long time now are men masquerading as women, are men identifying themselves into women's sport. That's what women and girls have been dealing with. And she is too gutless to admit that that compromises women's sport, that compromises the safety and fairness of women's sport. The very need for the category in the first place was to ensure equality for women in sports. But when that category is blurred, that equality goes away. She don't want to say that because she don't want to offend the woke mob. And it's not a distraction, it's at the core of the WNBA or women's soccer or women's boxing. It is at the core of women's sports to exclude men, to exclude cheating, to eliminate cheating, in order for women to enjoy the opportunities that are supposed to come their way when they compete in sports. They're supposed to have their own category, and those who are organising women's sports need to protect that category. That is the bare minimum. So you can call it a distraction all you want, and then there's people saying, well, it doesn't happen in the WNBA and all this stuff. but it's happening in our high schools. Girls have had to compete against boys in basketball. Those 3 high school girls who were injured in one game by a male who should never have been competing in their category, by a male athlete who should never have been allowed in their locker room. There was evidence of this guy harassing women, harassing the girls, sexually harassing them. He was suspended from a rowing team, another female rowing team. He was suspended from that team, allowed to compete in basketball, injuring girls, and girls who have to compete against boys throughout their career, throughout their sporting careers. They don't make it to the WNBA. The big names that we hear today, we would not know who they are if they had to compete against boys on the way up. So yeah, obviously not impressed by this answer. Claiming to not be educated. When you are coaching the WNBA, you know the difference between the female athletes and the males. You know the difference because you don't see your female athletes dunking. You don't see your female athletes performing in the same way that the men perform in the NBA. And this is very, very basic. It doesn't require a biology degree. It doesn't require a PhD. Calling it a complicated issue. Absolute nonsense. It's not a complicated issue. And there's a very clear and easy way to protect the women's category. And that is sex testing. If you've got a Y chromosome, you should not be competing in women's sport, in women's basketball, in women's soccer. Compete in the correct category. And no one's excluded that way, actually. Having zero tolerance on cheating is not a bad thing. You can call it exclusion, you can call it whatever you want. But when we protect the women's category, that is simply protecting it from cheats. And a women's basketball coach should be able to say that without fear of being cancelled or without fear of receiving backlash, like Sophie Cunningham is receiving now. That's all this is about. You don't want to end up receiving backlash, so you're straddling the fence. How have they not come up with a better answer than, I'm not educated enough to tell you how men and women are physically different? Serious question. They've had since KBJ's horrible response to what is a woman to think of a better response. Just vapid nonsense. You know there's going to be outkick journalists there, journalists from Fox, and you couldn't come up with a better answer than that? Just pretending to be ignorant. Nobody's ignorant when it comes to the difference between men and women, because we see it every day. They're so much more of a coward than Sophie. Sports have always been segregated by sex, because until recently, everyone knew that males have a physical advantage over females, and being delusional about your sex doesn't change that. And yeah, this is another version of, I'm not a biologist. Maybe her team should play the Indiana Pacers. I think the differences would become evident very quickly. And when she said she used to play against men, that reminded me of that dismissive senator who tried to belittle a female athlete.
I mean, I have my sports hat on now. It's all about a sports mentality, growing up in sports, being a tomboy. I mean, you look pretty healthy. I've played against girls that look like you. You look very much in shape and strong. But it's a sports mentality when you're growing up and how much competition that you'll take on. So it's not just a silver bullet for one community of sports players. It's the individual person on how competitive you want to be. So you grew up one way, I grew up a different way. I would have taken on a man in a heartbeat. I played in, I was the only girl sometimes in men's sports. But to have a man on my team, I would have welcomed it.
Number one, admitting that we are talking about men and boys here, no matter what labels people want to put on them, to placate others and to mask what they are allowing. We are talking about men and boys. And playing against men and boys when you were training or when you were in second grade, that is not the same as professional female athletes being forced to compete against men, because we have to consider those men to be women. And I like the way the question was phrased. He didn't say, trans athletes or anything like that. He acknowledged what we're talking about here, biological reality. So very disappointing of course, but it's to be expected in the woke WNBA. Nothing's going to change until we have more athletes like Sophie Cunningham having the courage to simply speak basic biological facts. Nothing's going to change until we have coaches brave enough to speak the truth, owners brave enough to speak the truth. But unfortunately, the people who own these teams, as we've seen, they subscribe to woke ideology and they have abandoned all reason, biological reality, acknowledging what their eyes are showing them. They've abandoned all of that. So it is an uphill battle, but that's why we're so thankful that Sophie said what she said and didn't back down. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video. And a huge thanks to all of those who have hyped my videos. It is greatly appreciated.